Okay, let's kick off. Folks, the way we'll run today is I just wanted to take everyone through just some of the highlights of the research. Some of you may have already seen some media coverage today. Some of you may have actually already seen the report. If you haven't, I'm just going to run through some very quick highlights. And then I'm going to facilitate a really good conversation with a fantastic group of people. So this is research undertaken by the FSC with the very generous support of Trustees Executors and with the great expertise of Core Data. So they're our partners in this program, and this is an initiative of the FSC's consumer group, our research committee, and broadly around our focus on trying to tap into what's actually going on in New Zealand, as much about money, but not just about that. Let's talk about some of the key highlights. Hopefully everyone can see this. It's a no-brainer to say, if you work in the sector, that the understanding that the very strong connection between money and well-being is very true. That's why we've called this, it's about money and you, but it's not about the money, it's about you. The link between well-being, relationships, mental health, physical health, and how you're tracking with your money is entirely connected, and this research was very strong in that regard. And the flip on that is that we asked the question about how often do you worry about money. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail. The other thing, finding number 2, was around tracking how New Zealanders across ages and generations feel and worry more or less about money. And what's true to say is that younger New Zealanders worry more than middle-aged and older New Zealanders. And we put that down to mainly because they're at the front end of accumulating assets, the start of their careers, and they probably don't have as much as older New Zealanders do. Finding number 3 was really around this idea about the understanding of the language of money. Through the conversations in the media this morning, it kind of goes like this. If you grow up around the kitchen table talking about money, understanding concepts, that money is a very powerful thing. And if you learn the language early on in your life, it actually becomes your friend. If you don't, it can become your foe, and that accounts for some of the stress. So the question, which we'll explore in the discussion, is the education piece. How do we help people understand and get better at the language of money? Finding number 4 was around preparation for retirement, and we found that just over 70% of New Zealanders are unprepared for retirement. That's obviously a concerning number, although in the face of COVID right now today, the questions are much more about putting food on the table and coping in today's time. So we'll explore that as well. The interesting thing plays out in finding number 5 around insurance. And the figures are startling. Our previous research around insurance and managing risk found that New Zealanders understood risk, but then didn't do terribly much about it. The data in this is, I'll show you in just a moment, is pretty frightening. And finally, every good story needs some green shoots. Every good story needs some optimism. And the optimism out of this report is that Kiwisaver can absolutely be the game changer. With over 75% coverage of Kiwisaver in the New Zealand community, the idea and the notion that having a Kiwisaver fund, product, engagement, interaction is something that we'll have for the duration of our lives becomes really important. I'll just flick very quickly. Again, these slides are going to be available for everyone. I'll just flick to the insurance conversation. Just this is so stark. If you have a look at the orange bar, this talks about people who have never had any of this type of insurance. Life insurance at 38.9%, trauma insurance at 70%, and income protection at 68%. So it seems to me we've got an absolute crying need in our sector across a number of things, and one of those conversations is around insurance. The other piece here, as you can see, is around where people are invested. And Kiwisaver obviously is the standout. So at a sector level, the challenge for us all is how do we make Kiwisaver the most meaningful platform to educate, engage, and help people make quality, long-term and informed decisions. So if that's a little highlights tour around money and you, we might just switch off the slides, and I'd be delighted to introduce you to our fantastic lineup of people today. On my top left, Tim Barnett, who's the CEO of FinCap. He's going to introduce himself and tell us a bit about his world, but works really closely helping vulnerable consumers in New Zealand come to terms with money and wealth. To my right on my screen, Andrew Inwood, who's the founder and the CEO of Core Data, who's done this research for us in New Zealand, but has a footprint globally, and it'll be interesting to hear what that footprint says in relation to this topic. On my extreme right is Ryan Bessemer, CEO of Trustees Executors, and TE as a business obviously helps New Zealanders with many of their financial needs, supervision, wills, and so forth. And be interesting to hear Ryan's perspective, both as an Australian, but also as a leader of the TE business. Really delighted to welcome Jane Wrightson, the Commissioner for Financial Capability. Jane, it's Jane's first outing on the FSC's Connect webinar series early on in her reign as the Commissioner, and really interested to hear her perspective on these conversations. And finally, we have Camilla Tamai, who's the Director of Iconic, is a practicing financial advisor and owner of a financial planning business, a parent to a number of kids, and we've been having a number of really rich conversations about how do we help our kids get good at money. So perhaps to start off with, if I go straight to Ryan. Ryan, TE supported this research. What's your sense of the findings, and why is this of interest to TE?
Hi, Richard. Thanks for the opportunity to help and contribute and sponsor the research done by FSC and Core Data. First, thank you very much for that. Now, obviously, at TE, as a trustee company, our focus has always been end investors. How money affects the physical and mental well-being of Kiwis ties back for us to our fiduciary obligation that we have and always felt in terms of our organisation. When we first spoke together about this research, we were keen to understand more about investor sentiment and feelings in the market, so we could share that with the marketplace and with our clients, of course. Now, due to the recent pandemic, I think the impact that's had on the worldwide economy, this research to me is more important than ever. What concerns me, and coming out of this research, I suppose, is that overall New Zealanders don't see themselves as being financially healthy, and I think that's quite concerning. Considering how much of an influence that is shown in this report that financial health has on physical health, relationships, and mental well-being, I think that's something that's really pertinent to us as an industry. And I really hope what we can do today is spread some light on potential solutions around that, and really to start that conversation going. We all know with commitments and time pressures, a lot of us don't have the bandwidth to be actively monitoring markets and so on and so forth, and that's why we leave these things up to professionals. But in the end, there also needs to be some sort of literacy out there in the market, and I think this is going to show the fact that we need that literacy, and particularly now at a time with great volatility, what decisions people need to be making now about their financial well-being are really important. Even us as professionals and pundits, sitting here today and talking about what people need to do, I doubt all of us are going to know what markets are doing or going to do over the course of the next 12 months or so. So I think what we need to start talking about is how we can bring some everyday rules into supporting literacy and supporting the everyday Kiwi.
That's great. Thanks, Ryan. That's an awesome segue to Jane. This next section is probably a couple of minutes for each of the speakers, just to kind of set the scene from their perspective. Jane, a few months into the role, how's it going? What's your game plan, and what's your observations on the topic of money and you?
Ngā mihi mahana o te wā kia koutou. It's been 3.5 months, and as some of you may know, I came from the media and sector from a different Crown entity. So it's been a huge learning curve, it's true. And then COVID was chucked in just for a bit of fun. I have come to this job, if you like, as a consumer and certainly not an expert. And even I have been astonished at what has been revealed over COVID. This research today is incredibly important. I would say that it mirrors the research that FSC published only 2 weeks ago, almost exactly. Now, ours was a OECD-based study of 3 countries, New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and Finland. And the New Zealand results on financial capability or resilience around lockdown were the worst out of all 3 countries. We too had the 70% figure, 35% of households in difficulty. They probably were already, but 40% now seriously at risk of tipping into hardship over the next 1 to 3 months. All of this is exposed, I think, is our low level of savings. We're the worst savers in the OECD. And internationally, all international research, as you people will know better than me, is that savings, of course, are critical in households avoiding hardship. The CFFC, as you know, publishes a 3-year report on retirement income policies presented to government. One of the recommendations last year was that Kiwisaver accounts be built with a sidecar savings facility, which could be drawn on an emergency. That's a really live issue at the moment about how we might do that. It might help people in hardship stop turning to Kiwisaver first, obviously. Excuse me, at the beginning of lockdown, we, like you, were deluged with people not understanding what Kiwisaver was, the difference between a savings account and an investment account, and the need to not panic and breathe first, which was a coordinated message that all of us in the sector carried out during that time. The review, and this is of interest to this part of the industry, I think, we also recommended that there should be a financial capability hub established for those applying for Kiwisaver hardship withdrawals. In other words, if they're allowed to access some money early, should that be filtered through the lens of some free financial advice on the way through? You would think so, wouldn't you? The government is reporting back on our recommendations in the next few months. I think what we all know, you would have known it before me, this has been a rapid learning curve, is that clearly financial capability education delivered by the current silos of government, community and education and industry is clearly not working. We need a more joined up approach. Our messages are good, I think, and they're more aligned than I thought they would be. But the way we're not getting out to people in a way that really sticks when the chips are down is, of course, the most crucial issue coming out of this. So what's keeping me awake at night, worrying about whether there's any solution to any of this? And also the key problem for much of this is that we are a low-income country, as we know, and we have high consumer debt. These two things are not a happy marriage. I look forward to learning more through this webinar.
Thank you, Jane. That's a great segue and a great start. And Camilla, I might go to you if I can. You're at the front line advising clients. What's your take on this conversation, and what's been keeping you up at night through the last few months of COVID?
I guess from my perspective, I think the key thing for me personally was, how are we going to survive, not only during but post-COVID, and how are we going to best support our customers. And I think that, for me, there's that trying to find that balance, because I'm running a business, I'm supporting a team, and I need that team to be able to support our customers, but we've got to be in the right frame of mind ourselves before we can help anyone else. So just through that whole period, and even sort of after, we had the largest number of customer inquiries and premium holiday claims we had ever experienced in our business throughout that lockdown period. So it definitely wasn't a holiday, and we're still there's still the aftermath of that. And I think the concerns have been, just the inquiries that we've been getting around, your clients that noticed the drops in their Kiwisaver balances, the number of redundancies that we've had, the number of clients that have had changes to their work status. And you can hear and you can see the tension and the stress, which is why I absolutely agree. I don't think there was anything that came out of this report that I disagreed with, or that I didn't expect, to be honest, because I've seen a lot of that, just take place over the last couple of months. So, for us as a business, and trying to support our clients, I think it's all about that education. Like, we're big on education, and so throughout that lockdown period, it was how are we going to do this? It's not just about reacting to client inquiries that are coming in. How can we be proactive? So we did everything from send out emails to all of our clients. We were getting on the phone to a lot of our clients. We were running workshop online webinar series for weeks, for not just our clients, but for anyone that needed some extra help or support, or just to upskill. I was also running websites in relation to parents supporting their their children, the younger generation, and I had my two young adult daughters on one of the webinars with me, and we engaged with a lot of students throughout that time, and it was really, really exciting, but at the same time challenging.
That's awesome. Thanks, Camilla. We'll come back to a number of those issues as you've expressed them. Tim, your organisation is really in the front line of working with vulnerable consumers. Tell us a bit about that, and what have you seen over the last couple of months?
Thanks, Richard, and thank you very much for commissioning the research. As Jane said, incredibly important in building up the evidence and preparing us. So my world is 72,000 one-hour conversations between financial mentors and people who are recognising they're in financial hardship or approaching it. Those are 72,000 conversations a year. And of those people, about half are Maori and Pacific, 2/3 are women, and it's delivered through about 330 locations around the country. So this is in Australia there are financial counsellors, and here there's our financial mentor network, and globally nothing else quite like it. So it's a really great way to deliver services directly to people. And people arrive, because of the stigma of debt, they tend to arrive right at crisis point, with an average of 10,000 in debt, an average of 3 loans. So we're dealing with bulk at scale services. Our concern is that people won't survive this next period financially, that what is already a pressured situation will become impossible for them. We're also experiencing the quiet before the storm. In Australia, after the bushfires, Christchurch after the earthquakes, there's about a 1-month period from when the immediate crisis calms down to when the tsunami starts, and that's still to happen. I think it won't happen probably to October, November this year, so there's a bit of time to get ready for that. We also recognise that many people living on low incomes are the best budgeters we know, that there isn't a relationship necessarily between making money and being good with money, because we see people budgeting in the most incredible circumstances really superbly, and spreading those skills to us is important. We also want to see the law placed in the right way, because there are companies trading some pretty damaging products out there in that payday loan market, which if people use them, it's likely to make the situation a lot worse. So we're also guardians in that area. And just reiterating what Jane said, Kiwisaver hardship, increasing demand, we need to have a financial capability lens in that process. And that's something which I'm hoping the FSC network will come on board with.
Great, thanks, Tim. Look, we're going to come back to that idea about it's not what you earn, it's what you do with it, or maybe that's not quite right, but I think that is an important conversation. Andrew, lastly to you, if I can, you've got the perspective of the researcher, but you've also got a global perspective on this. Well, what have been the things that have kept you up at night in relation to money literacy and what people are doing over COVID?
So the critical question for me, why were people withdrawing money from the superannuation and they're doing and drawing on savings around the world? There's kind of two inputs to this which are really important to understand. One is the input of how much you've been able to store and save up, but the other one is how much you earn and how you treat money while you're earning it. I'm concerned, the thing which concerns me most is the shifting nature of work around the world and how that's going to push people in low-skilled jobs out of work. Around the world, you can already see governments intervening in this space to try and make that much more palatable, but those governments are ones where they can afford to make that happen. And Australia is a case in point. We've been a low debt nation for 27 years, and the debt that we've had has been mostly investment debt rather than consumption debt. But sometimes the loudest noise in the world is the sound of Australians patting themselves on the back. So I'm reluctant to talk about that too much. What I'm concerned about is that there is nothing that can ostensibly be done for the people who are potentially turning 35 to 45 in the next 3 to 5 years, because the money has come out of the system. The GDP shrinkage around the world is incredible. There has to be some kind of government intervention at that level to flow that through. But the next generation, and I think Jane was talking about this, is where we could really make a difference. And Camilla was talking about this as well. Where this fits in schooling, who takes responsibility for the education and who takes responsibility for the behaviour change and rewarding the right behaviours, I think sits firmly with kind of the people on this call to drive the agenda. And Jane obviously has got a great position in that space to do some things. So do you, Richard, but also with the governments. And there were some comparisons that New Zealand was making earlier about Finland and the UK. Their governments with, one has a high compulsion nation and one's a low compulsion nation. I think that compulsory savings networks, as proposed in Australia and some other places, do change the economics of a country. But how we convince people to defer pleasure, that's a big challenge, because that's really what savings is. It's future spending which is being preserved. Humans, by and large, are very, very poor at that, and understanding that's important.
So Andrew, just let me explore that tiny bit further with you. This notion of good savers kind of pay themselves first, defer their pleasure, make some behavioural calls. What is that? How does that translate? Like, what do you see in behavioural stuff? Camilla, I might go to you next on that one for a frontline view.
Look, as I've said previously, I definitely think that there is a little bit of a lack of connection. I think that this is something that needs to be sort of, the foundation of that is through our education system in the schools. And to me, that should be like the phase one of the preparation and the planning piece, whether or not that's compulsory foundation programs that are run through schools. I'm just thinking about my own children, 2 of them who have just left college in the last 2 years, didn't have any of that, like nothing at all. And, it's just simple things like teaching them the basics, whether or not that's, student bank accounts, savings versus borrowings, interest, basic budgeting. Kiwisaver is an important part of that, because a lot of students, before they leave school, are already working part-time. And then taking that into the phase 2, which is education in the workplace. So phase 1, education in the school system, phase 2, education in the workplace. And that is probably the implementation and protection phase. So working with whether or not it's employers or unions, where you can look at rolling out workshops. I mean, we're already doing a lot of that, but we're we are only at a certain scale, and then it's followed by potentially one-on-one consultations for those that need a little bit more support. So I'm thinking sort of like health and financial well-being workshops. But the third phase for me is just that collaboration and key industry partnerships, because there's a few different sections of this. You've got mental health, you've got the financial services sector, you've got the like I said, employers and unions, and then you've got the education sector. How do we all come together and try and work as one to create a movement? And I also think having brand ambassadors within each of those segments would also be really helpful. But yeah, I could go on, lots of ideas.
Yeah, I'm just going to read a couple of comments. Andrew, I know you want to jump in. A couple of comments that are coming through from Andy. I'm a mortgage broker. I regularly get young couples coming in to see me with 30 to 40 grand in personal debt, wanting to buy their first home. How are we allowing this to happen? One set of comments. Another comment, it's not what you earn that matters, it's what you do. It's what you get to keep. Has been my personal mantra, and one I share with clients from Barry. Thank you, Barry. The conversation around the dinner table at home is far more effective than what's taught at school, provided it's the right conversation. It says, Tony, Andy, it's easier to save, but it's easier to spend. We'll come back to some of those comments, so thank you for that. Jane, can I go to you for that observation? Is it about what happens at home, or is sorted and workplace kind of the foundation and everything else comes from that?
Well, we all know it's multifaceted. So modelling from home is fabulous, isn't it? Because, our first best teachers are our parents. We know this. If the parents are no good at it, it's a bit of a miracle and some good intervention somewhere that the child will be good at it, right? My generation had some quite clever financial education in the early days, frankly, with the old post office savings bank and the little plastic things. Remember those? And we'd go and tip our money off and deposit it in. And I know the ASB does that now in primary schools too. That stuff's awesome. We have only just managed to get sorted in schools back up, which we teach in secondary schools. We teach the teachers. And that's complemented by things like Banker, which is a terrific app, as you doubtless know, which is engaging for the students as well. The main problem in education, of course, is that it's not compulsory. So we have to be sneaky as. What we've managed to do with our Sorted in Schools program is at least get our materials NZQA accredited, and that's only just happened in the last couple of weeks. And that's been a serious mission by my education team, I can tell you, really hard work. So all of that's a start. So we're Sorted in Schools is available to secondary schools and to kura. A majority now are signed up, but she's a long-term game, this one.
Yeah.
But crucial. And does the education sector help itself in the space? Not so much.
We might come back to that, Jane. Thanks. Andrew, just back to you, and then Ryan, I'm going to head to you. The secrets of high net worth people. I mean, how is it that some people end up with a whole bunch of dough and a whole bunch of people don't? Is it just down to good habits, or is it about what you earn?
Well, it's a function of both, to be honest, Richard. But I don't want to be pejorative here, but it's to pick up on something that Jane was talking about. There's a couple of things which are really clearly evidenced by high net worth people. The first thing, it really does start at home, and it tends to be in houses where education is held in high esteem. The second thing that happens is that they see education as a pathway. And then when you subsect that even further, it's the people who get very rich see money as a score of achievement. So it becomes their constant focus of becoming rich. So they correlate wealth and happiness. So perhaps the question could be asked slightly differently, and talking about the people at the top end of the mass affluent curve who are kind of not focused on being high net worth individuals, where 80% of their time is consumed by the purpose of making rich, but where they have perhaps a more attractive life balance. what they share is this ability to defer pleasure, to put small amounts of their money aside and actually stack up what's going on. One of the things that we're bad at as humans is that we tend to do everything we can to drag pleasure forward. And learning not to do that is something which is hard. It's actually significantly harder for men than it is for women. Excuse me, I'm about to cough. I promise it's not the COVID. So there's quite a large amount of data on this, and what I'm really interested in is developing systems which allow people to see the future benefit of the pain that they take now, because savings is all about pain now and pleasure in the future, and unless people get that simply and graphically represented to them, then they tend to prefer pleasure now, and we need to develop systems to allow them to do it. I'm pro a system of compulsion and reward for this. So compulsion, which means making it really easy for the government to force savings through superannuation or other services. Reward through tax benefits for savings and actually feeling like you're being advantaged through the process. And reward for actually being able to model out the future benefit of paying down debt or doing those types of things. Someone was speaking earlier, asked the question about seeing people often with $30,000 or $40,000 debt and coming to borrow money for a home. What we tend to find in our research is that debt is typically consumption debt, which is holidays or houses or holidays or shoes or travel or those sort of things that you consume. People can't treat debt in the same way. They have to learn that there is consumption debt and investment debt. And if we could somehow find a way to benefit and allow people to do investment debt, this would be really important. Back in the 1980s, and sorry, this is a very long answer. I'm
going to hold you there, Andrew, just for a moment. I just want to go to Ryan. A great question here from Andy. Ryan, do you think that the absence of cash now has any bearing on our understanding of budgeting, so that when the penny jar is open, you can't spend any more? And perhaps you can talk, as we were talking yesterday, a bit about your personal story. How did what happened in the Bessemer household around the stories around money and what it does for you?
Thanks, Richard. I grew up in a household where my father was an accountant, so it was actually not a taboo subject to be talking about finance. But I know my wife grew up in a household where her father was a customs officer, and it was a very different thing. It was just something that just wasn't spoken about at all. And Tia, you've done our own bit of research about this concept of talking about money, and I think one of the questions we have here online too, or one of the statements is we need to get people talking about money and debt, and I think that's right. It needs to be not a taboo subject. We need to make sure that it's a comfortable topic to be talking about, and whether or not we're talking about real cash that sits in the wallet or cash that sits in the bank account, I think it's much of a muchness. If you don't see it, if you don't touch it, you don't feel it, and it's not tangible, it's much easier to spend in a way. But at the same time, if you know what to do with it, and it should be a matter of, once again, coming back down to education and discipline and so forth. I think one thing that really standing out to me in this conversation is tools like Kiwisaver that sort of allow us or make it easier for us in a way to be able to put aside money into investments, and being able to support that in the industry more, and just saying that it's a natural part of life. Every month when you put money towards your power and your gas and all that sort of stuff, you should put that a bit extra also towards your Kiwisaver as well. And one of the things that sort of I noted also recently in the data that came out of FFC was in regards to potential future upcoming withdrawals out of Kiwisaver for hardship. 22% of people or property renters at the moment are considering taking money out of Kiwisaver. And to me, what that means is that money is not going to be going into deposits on houses, which again, it comes back down to that investment debt as opposed to other types of debt. So,
that's really. Sorry, Ryan.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting, because I just wanted to jump to Tim on that question. Is money taboo? Is the subject of money taboo? And is that in part the cause of some people kind of getting out of control with money and then getting into that kind of stress trap?
Yeah, I think there are cultural barriers to some people being open about money. As I said, people turn up at our services generally when they are in a pretty terminal crisis in order to try and get through. And also there's an overlay of mental health, addiction, and so on with many people. It can make things worse. But I think if we're going to build a culture and an environment where people talk about money and debt, it kind of breaks down into a lot of the strands we've been talking about. So that lifetime learning is important. Certainly mentioning it at school, but what you learn at school and what reality may be in your mid-20s can be quite different. So it's a lifetime of learning and conversations, destigmatizing advice and help that you can get, normalizing saving, because when you start to save, you tend to start thinking and talking about money. And so we always tell our financial mentors, enable people to put a bit aside, 50 cents a week, to be a saving or a donation, to actually sort of be looking ahead even when you're just trying to cope with the reality now. And having wise law and regulations, we know what is right and wrong for the behaviour of companies in that environment. So it's all our jobs together to build the kind of environment we need.
Thanks, Tim. I'm just going to go to Camilla. It's a great question. Young people don't always see they have a future. Climate change, uncertainty, and perhaps that's driving some of their spend now behaviour. Is that your sense, or is that a bit of a bleak or a more realistic view, do you think?
No, I definitely think that's realistic, especially if I'm sort of comparing that to my two young adult daughters that I have, who I mentioned before. You know, I've just moved out of home, and it's very, very obvious to me that money is their biggest stress in life right now. And I've got one daughter that is just really uncertain about where she's going and what she's doing, and she's working 2 jobs at the moment, and she's just trying to find some sort of sense of stability. And I'm looking forward to sort of having a bit of a chat about the whole Kiwisaver and, you know, our finale, because there's a lot that I think I could, add to that part of the conversation. But yeah, this is something that's definitely affecting the younger generation, especially when you combine that whole mental health element with the, the financial stress. And just, I think that, you know, for a lot of, if my 2 daughters are feeling that, and I think they're pretty well educated in a lot of aspects, you know, it really does make me realize what a lot of their friends are going through, and what a lot of their own parents and their families are experiencing. My children have a lot of friends that have never bought their own homes. My daughters are one of very few that have parents that have. So yeah.
Thanks, Camilla. We're going to go straight to the door opener on the Kiwisaver conversation. So, Jane, let me go straight to you. Is Kiwisaver the game changer? Is this the way to start the conversation and get people with good habits, saving regularly, looking at investments, and getting a whole lot more literate?
Of course it is. It's the best thing. It's the best intervention that in the last 20 years. There's no question about that. You know, we went through this period where a long time ago there was various forms of compulsory or semi-compulsory superannuation stuff. Then we kind of fell into this hole of everybody look after themselves. And Kiwisaver is a brilliant intervention. Largely because it's got the hook of the house in the middle. So it's not much good making people do Kiwisaver and say, well, it'll all be nice when you're 65. You need the hook in the middle. So utterly superb. There are ways it can be improved, yes. But it's absolutely the linchpin of any sensible system, I think, and how much you make it compulsory and what you make compulsory and how you put the carrots in front of the horse is really the question.
Thanks, Jane. And Andrew, you've done a bunch of research across global systems in super. Your thoughts on this topic?
Well, People accuse me of being very an economic rationalist, which is, I think, a term of derision. But I subscribe to it full-heartedly. I actually think that at a young age that compulsion is really important, because that it becomes a way in which changes people's behaviour permanently, and they adopt a saving approach to it, and they learn to save. Whether people need to be moved out of compulsion at an older age and start to make decisions for themselves is a question which is moot. That's possible in the Australian system. It's certainly possible in the European systems. But the evidence is when people are given the opportunity to make the decisions for themselves, they tend to make poor decisions. The self-managed super fund regime in Australia is a very great case for that. And one of the most fun pieces of research that I've done in the last little while, and that's not normally phrases that people put together, fun and research, was observing the people opening market trading accounts when they were sent to work from home during COVID. Australians opened 147,000 new market trading accounts where they started trading the markets. 97% of them lost the money. So humans and gambling, humans and making poor investment decisions is really, really important. I'm pro-compulsion. I think the government plays a really important role in that. I'm pro-anchoring them onto the future benefits of what they're doing. But I'm also pro a system which is flexible enough to understand that people move in and out of economic certainty fairly quickly. The example that you saw in Australia about people withdrawing money from superannuation is a great one. It did give people a bunch of economic certainty. The average amount withdrawn was 7,500. And to slightly correct some stuff that was said earlier, for the majority of people who took that 7,500, it was almost everything they had. And in the main, it was spent on rent and food. So it wasn't gambled away. You can't go on holidays with it. There was nothing to buy. So I think that in the absence of systems like New Zealand's, which allow them to access other sources, that was a reasonable thing to do with that money at the time.
That's great.
If you look around the world, the systems that we have are very healthy, and that we should continue to work on compulsion and reward. Sorry, very long answer.
Thanks, Andrew. And Ryan, your take on this? We've got a few minutes just to explore one other topic, but yeah, what's your take on this notion of compulsion?
Definitely. I mean, I see, the comparison in my career towards the superannuation system in Australia and here, and I think there's things I like about both systems. I mean, I definitely like the system in New Zealand where we can access Kiwisaver at multiple times in our lives, and I think that's a great thing. But I think also, the concept of compulsion, particularly when you're young, is really important. You got your first job. If you had the option to take that money and go to the pub with your friends or put it away for retirement when you're 20 years old, I know which one my son would be doing. But I think Kiwisaver just becomes this, and even more importantly now in this economy, an integral mechanism to support financial well-being throughout your life. And we need to support that as an industry. And I think there's some rules we need to learn about Kiwisaver as well, which is, it's for the long term. Don't touch it, don't play with it. It's like a scab on your knee. Leave it alone. And look at it through certain times of your life and see how it's going. But definitely, I think compulsion is a good thing.
If there is compulsion, though, and nobody much likes the idea of compulsion generally, it would mean a serious step up and very intensive consumer education. Because what we know, and I expect you all know now, is that people don't understand it. They don't understand. But they don't understand where their money's disappearing. 100%
right,
Jane. There's so much trouble here with people not understanding what Kiwisaver actually is.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and at the same time, also we need to support growth of capital markets in this industry as well. So, what better way to do that than through Kiwisaver?
Folks, this debate's getting going, and I'm sorry I'm going to have to truncate it. Camilla, I know you want to have a word on Kiwisaver, so let's go to you, and then I'm just going to close off as we round out this conversation with a question to everyone. So where to from here? With your own particular role in mind, where do we have to head to from here? But Camilla, last word on the Kiwisaver conversation to you.
Yeah, look, just really quickly, as you know, I'm a huge advocate for Kiwisaver. I agree with basically all the comments that were made. I think that we've got this huge opportunity. If you look at 75% of New Zealanders in Kiwisaver right now, that's just a massive opportunity. If explained well, it's easy to understand. I think it's a good, solid foundation to start with, teaches people good savings habits. It's a great reward system, and people like being rewarded, meaning, you know, you contribute, your employer contributes. And just that piece around home ownership, as we all know, Kiwis love to own their own homes, but most importantly, it inspires others that maybe have been brought up within families where their parents have not owned their own home before, and it just, you know, it gives them a light at the end of the tunnel that there is a way, there is a future, just because maybe mum and dad haven't done it. It's basic tools and things that they need to know that might help them get there, which, you know, again, they might be able to support families or collaborate to be able to get the entire family into the first home. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Camilla. Tim, I'm going to go to you. With your perspective in your role, what does success look like? What do we need to do as a sector to kind of move this alarming research to a place where it feels like we're starting to address it?
I think we need to talk together more. I think we're quite often quite a stratified sector. We're the NGO bit, there's the government bit. Government doesn't always talk to each other well. It's great to see the Commission in the conversation, a whole lot of private sector entities, but there's not many places where we come together meaningfully. So I think to continue this kind of conversation is important. I think we need repeated research to show that we're actually learning from the experience we're having. And I would say we are, I mean, the most gripping period of my lifetime, with so many forces, COVID, climate, recession, all coming together, that this is a time where we're either going to do or something else is going to happen. So working together on these issues is going to be absolutely fundamental. Thanks,
Tim. Ryan?
Richard, I think definitely to continue the conversation, but I also think we need to add in very much life stages into the conversation as well. And there's not just one answer fit for purpose for everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. Jane?
I absolutely concur with the last two comments, and particularly around the working together. There are limited opportunities for government, industry and community to work together properly. You know, I'm being charged with leading the rebooting the National Strategy for Financial Capability, which is a very grand thing, which frankly doesn't work. And I'm still head scratching a bit about how to do that. So I'm really looking for help from industry leaders and their peak bodies to figure out ways where the three of us, government, community and industry, can actively shift the dial in various places. I think that, you know, the idea of changing the world is a bit much because it'll outlive most of us. But shifting the dial on two or three key things to show decision makers, both industry and government, that things can be changed if the right levers are pulled will be the trick. What those are yet, no bloody idea, just been in the job 3 months.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jane, and I appreciate you joining us so candidly for this discussion. Andrew?
Well, I think that Tim really touched on it and articulated it well, as did Ryan and Camilla. The really big question, I think, is that how do we keep the debate alive and how do we get control of the narrative? The only way we can get control of the narrative is to start to produce evidence about the effect of what's going on, because that allows people to choose and make decisions themselves. If I can do anything to help you keep this debate alive in New Zealand, then I will. I mean, apart from, you know, send my business bro providing free data. But the really interesting thing to me is that the effect of this is highly measurable. We've been doing at the point of COVID, we started doing research really rapidly to see what people were doing. We've seen $2 billion that we know about move from active share management into cash from the 6 super funds that we're very close to as people move their money. We can measure the effect of that. There's 1.4 billion gone into passive Kiwisavers at the time and they've given up a lot. And understanding the effect of that is really important. And enumerating that and talking about it and helping people understand that depending on where they are in the life cycle, as Tim and Ryan were talking about, and depending on where they're at in the risk cycle, then those kind of trends around the world are things that we have to evidence, and teaching people about how to stay the course through investment is going to make a big difference on people's outcomes. Because taking a loss now is going to take a long time to catch that up. And for some, they'll never catch up. Fantastic.
Thank you, Andrew. And Camilla, last word to you.
Look, I absolutely agree with pretty much all comments, especially what Tim and Jane had to say. I think collaboration is the key. Like, I really don't want to be sitting around in 10 years' time having the same conversation. So we've got to start doing things differently. And what does that look like for me personally? I see a lot of individual entities that are trying to achieve the same thing, but I don't see a lot of collaboration happening within these different entities. And I also, looking at maybe this research, a lot of younger New Zealanders worry more about money. So if we're trying to tap into them, or we're trying to tap into the vulnerable customers, whether or not they're, a larger, Tim was talking about 50% being Māori Pacific Islanders, then in my opinion, we need to have good brand ambassadors that fit that group of core people that we're trying to really educate. So it might be that we have some, successful young brand ambassadors within those different sectors, a little bit of cultural diversity, but I think that will be the key to creating some real change and impact. And as you can see, I'm really passionate about that.
You are, and you all are. And on that note, a huge thank you, because I do think we've touched a nerve here. New Zealand actually needs us to collectively sort this out, help guide, shape, lead, whatever words you want to use, because this is the resilience of the future of New Zealand. And in that regard, with the collective expertise, a huge thank you for your time. To the people out there, thank you for your awesome engagement. We might not have got to all of your questions, but we tried to get to as many of them as possible. And what it feels like is we've only just touched the sides, and we'll look to do this kind of session again, probably in the live at the conference, something like that. If you haven't seen the report at length, just duck into the FSC website and you can do so. So on that note, at 16:24, a huge thank you. Please tell us what you thought. Things on your screen right now, evaluation forms on your screen right now, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar on a topic of your choice. So let us know what that is. Thanks all, and thanks to the panelists. Cheers for now.